Hello and welcome to the Marilyn Monroe exhibition at the National Portrait Gallery. Now, those two words, Marilyn Monroe, they're so exciting, don't you think? I mean, has there ever been a film star as famous, as alluring, as iconic as Marilyn Monroe? I don't think so. One iconic image, another iconic image. Couldn't be more iconic. Now, Marilyn Monroe was born in 1926, and that means that if she was alive today, she'd be 100, and that's why they've put on this exhibition. So she's basically the same vintage as Sir David Attenborough. Imagine if we could have been celebrating that with a big party instead of this fantastic show, which contains pretty much all the memorable images ever made of Marilyn. And believe me, there were a lot of them. Now, because so many people photographed Marilyn Monroe, the exhibition has had to be divided up into these useful sections. And what they've done is they've chosen some of the best known photographers and given each of them a wall or two to show off how different their flavours were when they photographed Marilyn. Now, I like this one. This is Philip Holzman. What I like about it is that you can see her across the whole of her career. So right at the very beginning, she's still Norma Jean, the little girl from an orphanage who had a terrible life, had a struggle, didn't know who her dad was, had a mum who was a bit mentally unstable, and she's trying to make it as a film star because that's the way out for her, that's her dream. And Holzman photographed her at this early stage, and you can see she's slightly different, isn't she? The hair's different, the face is different, the coloration's different. She may be Norma Jean, but she's not yet Marilyn Monroe. But by the time we move 10 years later to the end of the 1950s, there she is on the cover of Life, the Marilyn Monroe that everybody knows, the one nobody could miss, the one nobody can forget. Now, most of the photographers in the show were male, right? So you get a particular way of looking at Marilyn Monroe. She's always innocent, but also alluring. But this photographer here, Eve Arnold, she has a different relationship with her. And I think you see it in all the pictures that she does. There's something more caring, more understanding, as if she's looking through to the real Marilyn Monroe, not just the film star, but the person underneath. And I particularly like this one here. It's Marilyn in a park, and look, she's reading a book, and guess what it is? It's Ulysses by James Joyce. Now imagine, most of us have tried to read Ulysses and not got very far with it, I think, but there she is. And look, she's right near the end. I think this is my favourite of all the photographers here. His name was André Dedin, and he met Norma Jean in 1945. And they went on this big trip together through Death Valley, and he photographs her looking so fresh and innocent. It was just a young girl that he'd met somewhere and thought, wow, she's really photogenic, we've got to take films with her. Of course, he fell in love with her, became kind of besotted with her. And although they had some sort of brief romance, it didn't last very long. And then she went on to become Marilyn Monroe and do all the things that she did. But he kept all the pictures he took of her, and he made this kind of tribute to her, consisting of different images with just Marilyn and a blanket, all these different faces. And even after she died, for the next 20 years or so, André Dedin couldn't get her out of his mind. She haunted him, like she haunts all of us. So this is the second section of the exhibition, and it's devoted this time not to all the photographers who immortalised Marilyn Monroe, but to the artists, so the painters and the printmakers. And of course, chief among these is Andy Warhol. And this was amongst the first of his famous images of Marilyn. And what's interesting about all these is that they were made after she died in 1962. So her tragic and mysterious death inspired so much sort of love and adulation in the world out there. And Warhol went straight to the studio and did these. But he wasn't alone. Pretty much all the artists we see in this final room, they're remembering Marilyn Monroe, but they're also kind of building pictorial shrines to her. And what's obvious from the start in these final rooms is how she was more than just a famous face, how she touched somebody so deeply inside that they felt obliged almost to commemorate her in a way that was sacred or religious or definitely special in some other way. I mean, these are pictorial shrines to this great goddess of the 20th century. This is probably the saddest image in a show that is sometimes sad. And it's by the South African painter Marilyn Monroe. It's called Dead Marilyn. So it's one of those images that was painted as a result of her early death in 1962. And somebody took a photograph of her as she was being carried out, having probably committed suicide or overdose. No one's quite sure exactly what happened. But of course it was a very unglamorous photo, and no one should have taken it, and they certainly shouldn't have published it, but they did take it and they did publish it. And many years later, the great Marilyn Monroe made this version of it. And it's Marilyn Monroe without any makeup, without any mythology, about as uniconic as she can be, just this sad human being whose life has come to an end. It's a very poignant bit of painting to finish off this generally incredibly exciting exhibition.